Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here once again. Thank you, as usual, for joining me in this journey, speaking with a bunch of amazing people. This time, we have the great pleasure once again of having Emily Moyer back. She's super fun, super interesting, and she has like her own. We were just speaking a little bit her own rhythm and the way that she experiences things at like a very high frequency, which is super interesting and unique. And we, as usual, again, we're not very sure what's going to come up in the conversation, and that's pretty scary, but it's also pretty cool and heart opening. So I'm very happy to have you back. How are you, Emily?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing good too. Very excited for our conversation. We had to reschedule a couple of times, but we're here, and who knows why the conversation needed to be moved forward a few days, a few weeks.
Yep.
There's probably something, I don't know, what have you been up to recently? I haven't had time to watch many of your shows or any of your recent shows. So many times when we've spoken, it's mainly I'm like, oh, okay, they're talking about this with Emily, so I want to jump in. But this time I'm not very sure. I haven't been following you so much recently.
So well, I've been very busy. And it's been a little bit like I've been doing a lot of shows and that kind of stuff, but also Laura and I were able to move into an office. So we're trying to get our business going. So that, and then I also have started dipping my toes back into doing music events, parties and stuff here. And so this week is I'm doing a monthly thing with a friend. And so this week is that. So my energy is kind of spread out amongst a lot of things. And then there's just also the general craziness of the world. So I've been very busy. And I would say that a lot of times there's like sort of a theme to what I've been talking about the last few weeks or months or whatever. But right now, everything is so crazy and chaotic that I have like one stream of information open with one person, another with another. I'm talking, there's all sorts of things going on. But you know me, I can talk about anything, right? Like, I had just a few weeks ago, I was the first guest. A friend of mine here that I know from the music scene started a podcast, right? And I was her first guest. And she was very blunt and honest with why she was having me as her first guest, right? She and I agree about almost nothing about what's going on in the world, but she figured that if she gets into trouble or ran out of things to talk about, I'd be able to save her, right? So she counted on that. So she had me on. We actually had a great show. It was really good. People liked it. And then the next weekend she had on somebody else, and like the conversation apparently was a dead end after 20 minutes and she didn't know what to do, right? We could have, I think we only got through like 3 items on her list of possibly 20 things we talk about. So to say that I'm verbose and can find a way of making conversation about anything would not be an understatement.
Yeah, and I'm very similar in that way. Like I can talk about anything, but I also think that maybe I sometimes have this ability of like, since I can talk about so many things, I'm also good at like joining the strings together and bringing them into some coherence. So maybe there's something with that. Yeah. So I don't know if you would like to bring something up in particular that comes to mind, and we can just riff on that.
Well, we can do that, or we can also, because it seems like you've been busy doing other things and not paying attention to your usual data streams, which I highly encourage. Like I go through phases where I don't listen to anything at all, even though there's lots of people out there who do lots of work that I'm interested in and whatnot. Sometimes like my brain can't take anymore, right? I have to just like pay attention to nonsense, which is like tennis in the news or whatever. I can't listen to like important information because my brain needs a break or whatever. So what have you been doing? Like, where has your attention been focused? It might be interesting to kind of follow some of your rabbit trails off into the mountains, let's say.
Yeah, sure. I agree that we need like cycles, right? So the different sides of the coin. So I like how you say it's like watching something unimportant, like sports or whatever, and at the same time learning through that experience that,
totally.
that there is also something important there that is being expressed in a different type of language, maybe, or right? So I mean, you speak about tennis many times, and how you see, yeah.
Let's talk about that for a second, though, right? I just
Sure.
finished. I just did 2 hours on tennis, so I'm probably good on tennis. But what I didn't say in the show I just did was, one of the things that I've really come to understand. People will come to me and ask me, like, Emily, like, how do you do that with your head? Like, how are you able to pull together all of this stuff and like make something that sounds absolutely ludicrous make some kind of sense and also sound fun or interesting or whatever? And I got to a point where I started to realize how important it is that I have such a diversity of interests, right? But that one of the most important diversity of interests I have, like, when we first wake up, we just start paying attention only to like politics or the alternative media or whatever your thing is. If you're like worried about the chemtrails or worried about 9/11 or worried about the election or whatever your thing is, you become highly focused on one thing and then more generally focused on waking up or conspiracy issues or something. And we stop paying attention to all the things in life that we were interested in before we found out there was a problem, right? So like the problem took over, not only out there, but like our minds as well, right? And
Yeah,
so for many, many years, I wasn't paying too much attention anymore to sports or to the music or other things that I had been interested in my whole life. As I have become a content creator, for some reason, the drive to look at information all day long has become less, and it's driven me back to things that I really liked before. And the more I engage in those, it seems the better able I am to sort of integrate all of the information together, figure out which strings, like where there's parallels and which strings that to pull on that sort of create some sort of synchronized experience. And I think one of the most important ones, and I think one that a lot of people in alternative information poo-poo a lot, is sports, right? Like they think of sports as being something to distract the masses or something that you spend a lot of time and energy and effort on. And because of that time you spend there, you're not spending that time doing research, becoming engaged politically or apolitically if you're whatever it is, right? And I think that's wrong. Like, I actually think that both the participation, there's some that'll be like, oh, I like to play sports, but I'll never watch it, right? I think both are important. I think physical activity is really important to being able to integrate all of this challenging information. It like moves it through your system in a way so that it doesn't get stuck here and here and here and whatever, back here for a lot of people. The physical movement is important, the coordination. Also, if you're 100% sure that the, police or the FEMA people or whatever are coming for you, you better be able to run when they get there, right? So the physical stuff is important, but also watching sports, because sports have tactics, techniques, physics, metaphysics, archetypical aspects, esoterics, like occult. A lot of sports come from very occult sort of rituals and practices and things like that. I have learned how to analyze all of these other things based on observing sports and watching people, and not only watching them, but paying attention to the way the experts analyze the sport, right? And then see, like I love listening to like people on YouTube who do like pre-match predictions or pre-match sort of ideas or rankings, and then post-match analysis and see how it came out, right? And I love listening to people, like I don't know too much about like the techniques of tennis, right? But when I listen to some of these guys recommend that someone who's had trouble beating so-and-so employ a particular tactic, right? And then they play and maybe they employ it or maybe they don't. But if they do employ it, then I can see, oh, like, look at that, just making that little shift in the way that they were doing something completely changed the outcome. Or if they don't do it, I can see it's now obvious to me why it's been so easy for this person to beat them and continue beating them. It's because there's this hole in their game, this weakness that they go to every time, right? And so, I love that. Like there's a guy, I've talked about him before, named Gil Gross. He has a YouTube channel. He actually just graduated from college and is starting to get a little work out there with Tennis Channel and with the different tournaments and things like that, but he does a lot of analysis on a YouTube channel, and listening to him analyze the tactics that the players use or don't use, or he thinks they should use, and then seeing if they, how that translates into whether his predictions are correct or not, has really helped me sharpen the way I examine the issues that I'm interested in, right? So for both watching and the enjoyment, but also understanding the sports and all the energies around it, but also analysis, man, right? Like we spend a lot of time analyzing politics, social stuff, media, entertainment, Hollywood and whatnot, but do we really understand what their tactics are? We think we do, but like sometimes when you actually watch the way their game or the tactic is deployed, it shows you that maybe the tactic or the point or the thing they're striving for is actually something a little different than what you thought. And having you believe it's the other thing clears the field for them to make the end run, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, and like learning to like use all of your abilities, all of your brain, all of your not just analyzing things intellectually, but like in sports, I'm pretty sure most likely the other part of the brain, the more artistic and creative part of the brain comes into play. And when you learn, for example, like you're saying, what certain techniques or tactics a player uses, your brain kind of incorporates it in a way that isn't just rational or logical, but more intuitive and like in a certain way, like fractally, your brain sees that and makes the connection, to whatever else is important for you. This thing can be done in another way, but that happens automatically. And if you're always focusing on the same kind of information and you're always looking at it from the same perspective of intellectual or rational understanding, you're gonna miss that other part. And like you're saying in politics, for example, that idea of like, okay, so for example, people talk about the conspiracies and what they're doing to keep us in fear and to keep us down, and they sometimes get lost in that rabbit hole. Oh yes, this is happening, and that and the other, and all the different tactics that they are using for this, but they never stop for a moment to think, maybe why is it important for them to have you in fear? Who are you? Why are you so important that they would need to do all this Machiavellical, complicated thing to keep you in fear if you are so weak as you have understood that you are because of what they're doing? So maybe looking at it from that other side, you realize, okay, so this whole complex game that they're doing must mean that there is something powerful within me. And now let's take some steps to look within and see how powerful and why they are afraid of me, actually, why they feel less than me, that they need to do all this complicated stuff, right?
So, well, one of the things, like I'm 100% certain at this point that the sort of truth movement or the conspiracy rabbit holes, like it's not that there's not truth to them. Some of them are bullshit, but it's not that it's not true. But I think the waking up, like think about this, like all these things were sort of done in secret or nobody really noticed them for quite a while, for many, many hundreds of years or thousands of years, or if they didn't talk about them. But then all of a sudden, like, like in the 90s and early 2000s was this huge, like, a huge outpouring of everybody starting to recognize this, but think about like how many people have gotten stuck, right? So it's kind of like, let's just say you've discovered, okay, so let's go to Uruguay for a second. I'm going to have a tennis analysis for a second from Uruguay, but I'm assuming the most popular sport there is football or soccer, right? Soccer. Yeah. Okay. So everybody's always, whether people are wealthy or people are poor, they all like to play soccer, right? And the people who are wealthy, they have nice, well-manicured fields, right? In their, areas that they live in, or they have access to the club that has whatever. And then the people from the poor neighborhoods, they have to, share at the local park, right? And it's hard to get a spot or whatever. But then every once in a while, like, you just find, like this has happened you're walking around, you're in some area of town you don't go to, and you find there seems to be a park that nobody knows about that has a perfect field to play tennis, and no one ever is there. So now that becomes your spot, right? Where you go and you show only your friends who you want to play soccer with. Don't tell anybody, right? Don't tell anybody, because if everybody else finds out, then everyone's going to play here and we're not going to have our place to play soccer anymore, right? So imagine, let's just pretend, let's pretend for a second that we live in some kind of place where there isn't just one reality. There's multiple dimensions, or there's whole areas or pockets or ways to step outside of time, either momentarily or for long periods of time. But it's, like you go there and you have it's different than it is on the ground in our everyday reality here. And you go there and there's something cool about it, or there's not a lot of people there, or the people there are all polite or all kind, or, everything is beautiful there. I'm making stuff up, right? So you have an experience where you either by accident or on purpose, because you suspected such a thing might exist, have figured out how to get to this little, let's just call it pocket universe, right? So you're there, and of course, unless you're like a monk or someone who really likes total solitude, right? You're gonna feel compelled to want to tell somebody, because it's always more fun if you're found something cool to show it to someone and then enjoy it with someone else, right? So you show it to someone and it's don't tell anybody, because then everybody will come here. Okay, well, can I tell my best friend, right? Can I tell? Okay, you can tell one person. Right. So you get to a place where after a little bit, some people know about it and you're like, dude, we definitely don't want everyone else to know about this. Right. So what we're going to do so that people never think about stuff like this or have any idea what we're actually doing is we're going to convince them that what we're really doing is this. We're going to we're going to create a diversion or a display that is so phenomenal. Let's go back to the park thing, right? You don't want anyone to go to the park there, and you just heard one of your friends said, oh my God, I told so and so, and he told them they're all on their way here. You're like, no, I don't want them. Okay, let's create a diversion on the way. Let's go blow something up on the side of the highway so that people can't pass, or that people will be looking over there instead and they'll miss the hole in the trees where the entrance to where the soccer field is. You create a diversion, right? That takes up a lot of time and a lot of attention and a lot of energy, and that is endlessly fascinating, right? You cannot, if you get into conspiracy rabbit hole diving, and I know this because I've been doing it, and I continue to do it even though I'm saying this, right? It's a never-ending black hole, right? You always, one leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. And the early ones are pretty predictable. People find out about this one first, then this one, then this one. And then you hit a point where it's some people go this way and some people go this way. And then you go down those paths for a while, and then those branch off into 6 more. But still, everybody had that same entrance point that was a few miles before the soccer field, right? So keeps them from going over to there, or the pocket universe or whatever. And this takes up a lot of time, right? And now they're able to party at their soccer field or in their pocket universe, knowing that anybody who would be observant enough to discover this, before they find this, they're going to find this, and they're going to feel the need, if they're inquisitive at all, to go all the way to the bottom on this one, right? And then, that gives us a lot of time here. And it's not that they may never find out, but by the time they find out, we'll have discovered 3 more of these, or we'll have figured out how to seal it off so they can't come in, even if that means we then can't go out, right? It's all this kind of shit. So, but I would never have known that if I didn't get caught up in it myself. And I'm not advising people not to look or not to get caught up in it. But there's another world out there. There's another reality that is being hidden from us as we completely immerse ourselves and engage in, the search for the truth, right? And the truth is out there and inside of you. It's generally not on the internet or in the document dump from WikiLeaks, or maybe even in the library, although clues to the truth that is out there and inside of you can be found there, right? So there's that. Then the other thing, and we'll go back to Uruguay, and this time I just looked it up and it was who I thought it was. So there's really only one currently active, well-known tennis player from Uruguay. Do you know who it is?
No. I have an idea of tennis players like from the 2000s or so, but I'm not sure if it would be the same one. Maybe it's Marcel something.
The only currently well-known tennis player for men from Uruguay, his name is Pablo Cuevas.
Oh, yeah, I remember him. Yeah.
So Pablo Cuevas he's been around for quite a long time. I've been seeing him around for at least 10 years, maybe longer than that. He's mostly known as a clay court player, right? He's most of the Latin American players, with the exception of like Del Potro and a few others, they tend to be strongest on clay court, and maybe they have some transition game to either grass or hard court, but generally they're not all court players, right? Like Del Potro is not really good on clay.
Clay court would be like the orange one with brick. Is that the brick dust?
Yeah, that's the most common kind of court they have in Latin America.
Yeah, because interestingly, I always go to a park that is close to my house, where it's like at the back of a very important specifically basketball club here, but they are an all-around club, and they have tennis courts, and they are this kind clay courts. Yeah.
So most of the tennis courts in the United States are hard court. Most of the tennis courts in South America are clay. In Europe, it's a mixture of them. Grass courts, the least common court anywhere. Most of the grass courts are in Germany or England. There's a few here in the United States. There's a few in other places in the world, but mostly it's hard court or clay court. So Pablo Cuevas is mostly a clay court player, but he has had some ability to translate his game onto the other surfaces, right? There's a few people that only play clay court or only play grass, right? He's had some ability, he not the same level, but you have to not only understand the game you're playing, but you also have to understand the environment of where you're playing the game, right? So clay court tennis is very different than hard court or grass court tennis. The tactics that will work in one, like on clay, generally, unless you have just an absolutely brutally overpowering game, like are not going to work the same on hard court and clay or grass and clay or whatnot. So you have to employ different tactics for your own game. And then you may face an opponent who you face on other surfaces, but because of the way their game adjusts to the different surfaces, they may be employing a different set of tactics than they were when you met them on the other surface, right? Like the classic here is that, lots of people who can beat Nadal on hard court or grass can't beat him on clay, or lots of people who can beat Roger on clay can't beat him on grass, or whatever it is, right? So you have to understand the game you're playing. You have to understand where you are playing the game and the conditions in the environment there. And then you have to understand who you're playing with, or we prefer games that we play with each other, right? We like the open-ended game, the glass bead play, but some people are involved in finite games, which would be playing against somebody where one person loses and one wins and one loses. That is the momentary state of tennis, right? With each match, with each tournament, there's a winner and there are losers. But if you actually look at the arc of the game, Federer, Nadal, Djokovic, Murray, all these people who've been around for a long time, and there's a new crew coming up, they keep playing each other. They want the game to continue. It ends temporarily, but continues on a lengthy trajectory, right? And so there's tactics for the game today. There's tactics for the tournament. There's tactics for the course of your career and whatnot, right? Mm-hmm. There's all kinds of things to employ. And so my point with saying that is just, we may develop a lot of information, and that information may serve us well in dealing with other people in the alternative community, right? Or maybe even we can go to there's some crossover between the New Age or the spiritual community and the alternative or the conspiracy movement, or there's some crossover with people in the natural health field, or even with Christianity in some ways or whatever, right? So some tactics you've learned in one may transfer sort of well to another, but if you go to a person who's never heard of any of this stuff and try and reason with them based on the information they don't even have any idea what you're talking about. That's a waste of time. You may just be able to appeal to their humanity or their sense of fun or their sense of adventure, and in a half an hour get to the same level with them that you would have taken 5 years to get to if you tried to tell them about all this other shit that they didn't even know what you were talking about, right? So, little gameplay, big gameplay, overall gameplay. And that's, I think, why it's so important to incorporate sports into your life. And it doesn't mean everybody has to be a jock or a person who's obsessed with sports and doesn't know anything else about the world. It can just be like the one that appeals to you most, like when I spend an hour a week watching it, right? Or develop a little ritual around like, okay, like when I'm, out exercising, I listen to a video of somebody analyzing that or whatever it is, right? But something different than the normal set of information you look at.
Yeah, definitely. It gives the brain also a chance to, well, I think I said it before, but to like shut off certain functions and cultivate others that then can work together. So it's like always working out your right hand or your right arm. Eventually, I remember, what's this movie, The Lady of the Lake or something like that? It's a pretty trippy movie. I remember there's this character, which is a guy with one huge arm, and he's like always training that arm, and the other arm is so skinny. But yeah, dropping. Sorry.
I'm looking to see if I can find. I'm looking up Lady of the Lake, but all the pictures.
It's something like that. One of the main characters or actors is this redhead guy. He was also in the Planet of the Apes. He plays, I guess, an orangutan, a kind of older guy. And it's pretty good movie. But yeah, training different parts of yourself, because you are not just one aspect that you might be training. We are not just one thing. We are such a complex. The word holistic is being used so much now. There's many parts that make us up, which in the end is kind of an illusion that they are different parts, because again, if they work so well together, it's because they are actually different, maybe like in a train, different cards on the train that necessarily help the entire train move better if they are all oiled up correctly, and pocket universes. So you were saying like I like the thing of the cord that is hidden over there and distractions along the way. What do you think is going on? What do you think this kind of what would be one idea of something that we are being distracted from? I mean, I have my own ideas, but what do you think?
All right, so here's something. So last night I was out running around the lake, and right at the time that I was getting back and coming in the building downstairs, the girl who lives in the apartment right next to us and her dog were also coming in, right? But like, it's like, where did she come from? I didn't see her coming from the trail. And she told me, she's like, is it just me, or was there like a lot of homeless people out there tonight? And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't see homeless people, right? I said, there several weeks back, like for a couple months and up until a few weeks back, there was a fair amount of them around the lake, but most of them seem to have been moved or gone. There's one or two, but it's kind of like they're not the kind of homeless encampments that feel a little intimidating. They're just like random weirdos who erected their building that they did something, and it's kind of more like, almost more like some weird art or something like that, right? So I was like, yeah, no, I didn't see any. And she's like, well, I went this way, like over by HEB, and like there's people there living out of shopping carts and tents and this and that. And I'm thinking in my head, why would she go exercising over there? Like there is this one, so there's this street called Riverside, where like a little further down there is a lot of homeless encampment. There's like one of those, like an area in the middle of the street that's like a big grassy like island in the middle of the street, and there's like a homeless encampment there, and there's a few others, and it's like, it's about a mile from here this way. I'm trying to think, why would she go exercise there? Like it's the worst part of the area, like in terms of like street crime and that kind of stuff, but also it's ugly. Like there's this beautiful lake out here with the beautiful trail and trees and all this kind of, people running with their dogs. And she's like, yeah, I try, if it's light outside, I go by the lake, but If it's dark outside, I go over there. And I'm thinking, why would you go over there when it's dark outside? Just because there's street lights. But like, that's where there's that kind of stuff going on, criminality and just things that are a little uncomfortable. I'm not in any way equating all homeless people with criminal, but things that make people feel a little anxious and nervous, right? There's a few of those things out here, but there's like, she's nervous about exercising here because she felt like it gets dark, it's not that well lit, but there's tons of people out here. There's families running with their dogs, there's people canoeing, kayaking. I'm like, I don't feel out and say, I run out there all the time by myself with Laura, daylight, nighttime. I've never, anything has made me feel one bit uncomfortable, right? But I'm doing when I'm out there, I'm playing the glass bead game, right? Like I'm looking for like the weirdos. To me, when I see a homeless person or a gang member doing something, I'm like checking to see what their time travel skills are, right? I'm not thinking about them in a certain way, right? And I'm looking at the graffiti and the stickers and the area where the power lines and the power plants come right up against the water and how there seems to be like this explosive kind of energy around there. And I'm looking at like people doing weird things with their body, dance moves, yoga. I'm, someone running way faster than me. How are they so fast? I wish I could move like that. My mind is thinking about what I'm thinking of. I'm noticing the clouds in the sky are strange and it looks like there's a city up there, and I'm paying attention to this kind of stuff, right? And she's literally the whole time thinking like someone is after her, right? And I'm just like, so whatever fear, like I'm gonna guess that she's not a conspiracy theorist or very much into whatever, I don't know what, synchromysticism or certain kinds of metaphysics or whatever, right? I'm gonna guess she's not into that. So the mind control that they have sold her is that other people are scary and that it's unsafe to be like, out by yourself after dark, even though you have a large dog, right? So that she's looking for that, and that is controlling where she goes and what she's doing. I have made the calculation, like that there's a lot of people out there, right? And some of them are definitely weird, but none of them really look particularly bad. Every once in a while you see something where you're like, I'm going to stay away from that. I'm going to take the long way around or whatever, right? But that there is a world for me to discover out there that is some sort of unique energy that's created when power plants, water, and limestone come together that create an energy field that is the backdrop for all sorts of weird things for me to look at and experiment with it. And when I go out there, I'm just playing in that. And she's exercising with her dog on the street where like the grocery store and the gas station and all the stuff that you don't like about cities is, but there's more street lights, and so that she makes her feel safe. So like that, right? So I think it's just focusing your attention on one thing that makes you feels uncomfortable or makes you feel unsafe, to the point where you don't recognize all of the other things going on around you, and so all of the possibilities, right? So in this area that I speak about all the time, so just across the lake over there, if you go over the bridge, there is a very strange sort of lagoon that has like a bar that comes out. And then when you get to the end of that bar there, I don't mean like a bar you drink at, I mean like a sandbar, like there's a trail like on like a piece of land that juts out into the water. When you go across that, there's a power plant, right? And then next to the power plant on one side, there's like a little thing called a pocket park. So that's kind of a pocket universe. It's a little pocket park. It's a very interesting spot to sort of play with the time travel ideas. It's next to the power plant. On this side, there's the baseball field. And then over here, there's like a park, and there's like a restroom, and you see basketball courts, and you see everybody playing at the basketball courts. Tons of people, 30, 40, 50 people there. What took me like a month or two that I was living here before I saw that beyond the basketball court, there's a tennis court and nobody's there, right? So all of the activity that's going on where everybody is, like that's the furthest my mind can see. But just beyond that, it's like, oh, there's one of those hidden little tennis courts, right? That's back there. And only 1 or 2 times have I ever seen anybody using the tennis court, but the basketball court is always full, right? And there's always a lot of people in the park and whatnot. But if you get distracted by where all the chaos is, you don't see the promised land on the other side. Like you always have to go through chaos to get there, right? It's never just like, oh, this is nice, and the next area is nicer, and then nicer, and then nicer, right? You always, I mean, in any big city, you have to generally travel through the worst part of town to get to the best part of town, right? Like it's, you know, like we've all been to that. Like you have to go to a few shitty bars before you find the nice bar, right? Like it's just, but if you get stuck, like at that first thing you see, you know, so anyway, so that I think just whatever the first thing is that brings up our fear, I'm not going to say always, but a large percentage of the time, there's something that would be really interesting to us that's just on the other side of that thing that told us, wait, let's stop here, I'm scared. And that doesn't mean you should push through that fear right away the first time or by yourself or whatever, but start challenging yourself to look and see what's beyond that side, and is there ways to get through or past that? And sometimes you just have to go right through it. And so then you devise your tactics about that. And sometimes some of the people that you meet on the way through that you thought were scary are actually really interesting. And they're the same weirdos as you who noticed there was something else interesting beyond what was going on over here. They haven't figured it out yet, but to get close enough to understand it, they had to be in the weird zone as well. So, you know, how it is.
And as far as I can remember the story of that movie that I was saying, and I found it, it's called Lady in the Water. And the actor that I was saying, the redhead, is called Paul Giamatti.
Oh yeah, I know that. Yeah.
It's a very interesting movie, and now you make me think that they are kind of a group of misfits that see something is weird, and they are open to it. So they are nothing alike between them, but they do share this kind of different way of seeing things. And you also make me think of with this woman that you were describing. There's this story of the guy that lost his watch in the street, and he's like under a street lamp looking for the watch, and somebody comes and says, hey, what are you doing? No, I'm looking for my watch, I lost it. Oh, where did you lose it? Over there. Oh, but why are you looking here? Oh, because there's a lamp.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. He's distracted by things that have been placed or that are there, and which subconsciously make him feel comfortable looking for the thing where his mind allows him today to watch that, and being able to expand your trust in yourself that you can find things over there also, that there is no need for the thing that your mind sees as the permission for you to look. So this guy thought, okay, I can look here because to find something I need light. So I'm going to look where there is light, but he didn't trust himself to, well, maybe I can, my eyes will adapt to the dark and I'll be able to find it where I lost it. But that idea, right?
Yeah. So I think it's just that, right? Like it's pressing through, like, you know, just because something makes you feel uncomfortable doesn't mean you should turn around and go the other way, right? It's like, okay, why does this make me feel uncomfortable? Let's dip our toe in, let's test it out a little bit. Let's push through it. Sometimes there's nothing on the other side. Sometimes what you find on the other side is like weird and crazy, but not in the way you wanted it to be, but it's like, okay, well, now I know, right? There's almost like I'm not going to say never, because we've all had that experience of like going into somewhere that like our inner sides just were like, no. And it wasn't fear. It was just like a discernment. No.
Yeah.
So that needs to be listened to. But if something makes you feel uncomfortable and the idea then is that I should turn around and run the other way, you might want to examine that a little bit. Right. You know, so
definitely. Yeah. And discernment is so important, and learning to listen and to trust your intuition. So not being just running away from something or running towards something just without like giving it any prior, not just thought, but any prior like sensing of what it is that you're doing. I feel like one thing that's very much needed today is this discernment. And I remember in Chinese medicine, you know, they have the 5 elements, which are different from the 5 elements we know. but
Yeah.
two of them that are different is wood and metal. So like in the Chinese zodiac, the animals, and metal represents discernment in one of its descriptions, and it's like this knife that can cut things and say, okay, this is this and this is that. But there's also the other side of the discernment, which is you cut extremely or too much through stuff. So learning that balance between the too little discernment and too much that you throw away something that was actually helpful for you. That balance, I think, it hasn't been very much developed in our culture, and I think it's a very important tool moving forward into this new world that is being created by us and by others. I think so.
Well, interesting. So I'm familiar with the wood and metal being parts of Chinese medicine, but I wasn't aware that the metal represented discernment, right?
Yeah, it's justice. It's like the first thing.
Of like the precision of a surgeon with the scalpel, right?
Exactly.
They don't go butcher knife. They don't just like hack it. They go in there and they do it very carefully because you want to have regard for like the nerves and the vessels and whatever, but also you don't want to take off more than you have, right? There's all that. There's also the famous saying like Occam's razor, right? When you're discernment in deciding what information is true or not true, or what the likely scenario is. But think about what we're dealing with right now in terms of metals and discernment, right? And without naming anything in particular, like there's people that are concerned that there might be metals in a certain thing, and that these metals may cause people to behave in a way that shows a lack of discernment, right? Or whatever.
That's so that's true, yeah.
Right? And my guess, it's so interesting because I don't know enough about either China or about Chinese medicine to understand how well, like, do the Chinese people use Chinese medicine, or do they have the same bullshit, allopathic medical system that we have? Because everybody that I've ever met who's into Chinese medicine and is Chinese they moved to the United States. They're not in China. Right. So I don't know if the medicine that they practice, the ancient Chinese medicine, I mean, I'm sure we had some ancient practices of medicine, in Western countries that were better than the bullshit we have now too, but we don't know about that. Right. So I don't know how popular or common what we think of as Chinese medicine is actually in China. Right. But think about that though, with what's going on right now. Right? We don't hear conversation about there being the same level of the people being at war with each other over the issue of this one thing. Now, we don't know if that's because the government there is more totalitarian and just tells everyone what they're going to do and they do it, or if they're not having the poke over there, so they're not having as much of a conversation about it, right? They just thought okay, there's this virus, everyone has to stay in their home for 2 weeks, and they just did that with no argument about it, and that's it. I'm not really clear on what's going on over there. I don't think any American person who thinks they know what's going on in China actually knows what's going on in China. But interesting that metal represents discernment, and we think about like all the heavy metals in the water, right? And the things like that we think about, fluoride and all of these different things, and that the effect of them, if you have it in your system, is that it fogs the mind and creates lack of discernment. So that's fascinating that's part of Chinese medicine. I didn't know that.
Yeah, they like associate each one of the elements to a virtue, and so metal would be justice, and so then from that you start like I feel like it's pretty kind of intuitive once you start getting like the basic ideas, you start like symbolically, you start exploring them, and yeah, it totally makes sense, right? The justice and the what is correct, what is the discernment connected to justice for me is like the separating the right from wrong. Today is just sort of guilty and innocent, but yeah, those like separating the opposite poles of things and learning where to find that middle way, and that connects again to Buddhism and I mean in Asia and in those countries, that it's super interesting how they have these traditions that have been relatively continuous for many, many thousands of years. We can't even imagine how long they've been going on. And when we try to compare it with the system that we live in, or this new kind of world system, but which started perhaps from Europe and came to America, how young this system is compared to the ones that they have in China, in India, in Tibet, or whereas like in places like Iran and other places of the Middle East, how much younger our worldview is, and that operating system that we use, how much younger it is. And I wouldn't say that because it's younger or because of how it's different, I wouldn't say it's useless, but I understand that it's another perspective. So for example, allopathic medicine you were mentioning, maybe we could say, compared to the way that those other cultures understand the energy bodies, which are more important towards determining your health than the physical body, compared to that, okay, you could say, if you are, for example, experiencing headache, maybe energy work, maybe in energy work you would need to know more, whereas in allopathic medicine, you just go take the little pill. Every now and then it would be okay, so I need this headache to not feel it for a moment because it will help me get more clarity. The problem with our system is that it becomes very addictive, and when used too much, it first of all stops working, and then it becomes addictive, and you are always like in need, and you always need more. I remember this, and the worst sometimes for this is people who are studying medicine themselves, because they have this kind of blind faith, no discernment at all. And they're like, oh no, yes, because my professor told me, and they studied for 15 years, so they must be the law in this, and they become very dependent on their system that they are learning, and they become very exclusive or excluding of other systems, but they're never asking simple questions like, okay, so if this culture, just as an example, China or India, if they're using their alternative health systems and theories and practices, and they're still here, and they have never known about aspirin or about, I don't know, maybe certain kinds of surgeries or I don't know, stuff that is so Western and complex. If they've never known about that, how is it that they survived for so long, right, and without having people all stressed out and depressed and worried about life and the future and etc.? How is it that they did something right with a tool that you guys are thinking is bullcrap, right? So just look at that and say, okay, there is something that these guys know, but they are. I remember watching a video by Michael Wan about the medical system, how it was created here, and the roots that it has. And it's again a classic tennis court, hidden tennis court distraction, definitely, right?
So yeah, I mean, there's things like if somebody breaks their ankle, hallelujah for the American medical system, right? Like something like that, like those acute injuries, or like if you having like a gallbladder like attack that, sometimes, and this is where American medicine fails, or Americans' awareness of the overall holistic wellness of the body. There has probably, if somebody, let's say somebody has like an appendix attack or a gallbladder thing, or the appendix is a little different, I don't understand it so much, but with the gallbladder, there would be signs and symptoms in their overall health for months and years leading up to a scenario where a person has such a bad case of gallbladder stones that they need to have it removed immediately. But we're not taught to check for that stuff. If we have bumps on our skin, they give us cream for it. If we're having some back pain, they give us an ibuprofen for it. all along, those were signs and symptoms that there was the gallbladder wasn't working.
And not to mention the emotional side, right? And perhaps the thing that manifested in your body was showing emotional signs before, perhaps not so much, you could say, on an accident, but at the same time, you have the accident and it prevents you from walking. Okay, maybe there is something in connection symbolically with walking that you need to be looking at, and you need to rest, you need to allow yourself to have some time off, which maybe you don't, and suddenly, bam, you break your leg. Okay, you fix it with medicine, but you take away the possibility of learning about your emotional health.
Yeah, so if you get to that spot where you have to have your gallbladder out or you have a bad injury, hallelujah for the American medical interventionist system. But in terms of like how we overall care for our bodies and things like that, no, these other, Ayurvedic, Chinese medicine, even things from Latin American, different cultures and whatnot, have a much more, even other places from the West, not just the current modern American kind of thing, right? It's like an overall system of wisdom, and so the new thing, the young kid, like young country, America, with their highly technological interventionist medicine, so suddenly begins to believe that they have more wisdom than all these ancient cultures because they can do this stuff that looks like magic, right? Where the truth is like, you need the balance, right? Like these older countries have been dealing with some of these things, or these older systems have been dealing with some of them for a long time, but sometimes you get so mired in your tradition that your mind isn't open to new things. And so new technologies can't be born. So this balance, this back and forth, this sort of, always keeping in mind what the best thing for each single issue is instead of deciding that like one thing for everything. The other place where this goes, and it's kind of interesting, because I was just having this conversation with Danny yesterday. We recorded a show, it's not out yet, but we've been criticizing a particular person about, he's really starting to push this idea that free speech maybe isn't a good idea, right? And basically he and a guest on his show were saying that speech absolutism, free speech absolutism is an ideology. And it's dangerous. And only Americans are ridiculous enough to think that, because they're so young and they don't have the wisdom of being like a society or a civilization or a culture that's been around for hundreds or thousands of years, like they are in Britain, like the UK. Like the people in the UK are much wiser when it comes to knowing how speech laws should be deployed than Americans, right? So then you can say, okay, well, does the same thing, like what you're saying, that ancient tradition good for medicine, but you're saying ancient tradition not good for speech? That doesn't seem consistent. But sometimes, I mean, if you think about it, like that's exactly like the invention of free speech, or the correlation between free speech and the young country of America is kind of like a way of progressing things forward. Nobody is saying that allopathic medicine shouldn't be allowed to exist. It should be used for what it should be used for, right? And free speech, just because somebody says something doesn't make it so, right? So allowing people to say whatever they want, sure, it allows a lot of bad ideas in, but it also allows good ideas in that would never have been heard of if there was controls on speech the way some of these more traditionalist type of societies maybe seem to prefer, right? And so it's kind of, this gets back to the discernment, right? And the justice and the scalpel and whatever, for me, I'm a free speech absolutist, but I don't think
does that idea that they say of free speech not being a good idea, maybe, does that apply to them even? So like what they are saying, should it be, you know what I mean?
Their idea, these two, and there's others like this in the alternative media, like your Weinstein brothers and Rebel Wisdom and all these people, is that that the complicated issues, the difficult, controversial, complicated issues should be discussed publicly by a certain intellectual group. They will be decide, they will do the research and they will present to you the sanitized version of whatever it is. And that everybody else can talk about it if they want, but they shouldn't be allowed to have a platform to spread that information, right? So basically, only the approved committee of, mind-controlled idiots will be allowed to have free speech, because their free speech is intellectual and takes into account everybody's feelings and the rules of the board and all that kind of stuff. And everybody else is free to chat about whatever they want at the bar, but they can't put it on YouTube.
Yeah, I wonder what they spend, these types of intellectual people, what they spend their 100% of their time watching, right? Do they shut off a part of the brain and try to develop also the other side, like we were speaking before, or don't they? Because who is going to decide who should be the one who has free speech and who doesn't? I understand in the background what maybe they're saying, and it makes me think of, again, going back to Asia and the many thousands of years ago, the emperors used to be enlightened people. So of course you wanted an emperor, because the emperor was actually free from ego, and they had a very clear wisdom. They had developed their 5 virtues, etc., etc. And now it seems like only the intellect matters. So if I am the smartest person, I should be the one telling everybody what to do. But who is, you are saying that you are the smartest person because you've developed your intellect, but somebody else might say, yeah, but the intellect isn't the only thing. So you think you're so smart, but you're missing perhaps 80% of other types of intelligence.
So just so you know, these same people, they've all been censored by YouTube, and they cried foul when they got censored by YouTube. And in some cases, they were able to raise such a fit that they got their thing put back up. But if somebody else was censored for the same thing, but they don't see them as being in the same class of intellectual as they are, then it's okay that person, right? So censorship is, censorship for thee, but not for me, right? Is the kind of, it's fascinating to watch this stuff, right? Like, there's ideas out there that I think are terrible ideas, and I don't understand why people like them or think they're clever or smart or true, right? But like, the only reason that I would know that I think it's stupid or unclever or dumb or not true is because I got to listen to it, right? So like, how can you possibly develop any discernment if all you're served is things that are true, right? Like, we have to have that balance. Like, I think that process, that gift of being fooled by Alex Jones or QAnon or whatever, like, that's a lesson everybody needs to go through in developing discernment, right? The same way, like, the girl has to get her heart broken by like the handsome football player star guy who's a fucking jackass, right? Like, they're never going to know and start to look for better qualities in somebody besides how popular or good looking they are if they don't have that experience of being fooled. Like, I think there's 2 experiences that our overlords are trying to protect people from, even though they're doing the thing they say they're trying to protect people from. And they're 2 of the most important experiences a person can ever have, right? Being bullied and being fooled, right? Having some kid pick on you and tease you in the yard and steal your lunch, and you fighting back, right? Even if it means you get in trouble, you don't do anything gross, but that thing of like not being scared and doing what the bully tells you and like getting in his face and telling him you're not going to take it, even if you get punched, right? It's an important experience for kids to have, and the experience of being fooled, right? And not have somebody save you once you've been fooled, right? Like, we've all given money for something dumb before. We've all been, it's an important experience. And then the next time the guy comes and is like, my favorite are the people who, with the Nigerian email scams, right? You know what I'm talking about? But some people have to have that experience because there's something that delights them about the idea of money for nothing, right? Because it's always like, oh, I have $850,000 that I'm going to deposit in your bank account, and you just have to give me 10,000 of them, but you need to give it to me first, right? The person who's so like, oh, I want those $840,000, they need to have that experience of being fooled. It's just, that's it. Like I've been fooled. I needed to be fooled. Like I've like, had drug dealers steal my money before. And, like you can't really go crying. Back when I used to do drugs and I would do dumb stuff, like if I was in a city where I didn't know somebody, I'd try and find someone on the internet, and 9 times out of 10 it worked out. But that one time it didn't work out, right? It was fucking embarrassing, but like, what are you really gonna do, right? It's like gonna call the police and say like the drug dealer stole my money, right? Like I needed to be fooled, and I needed to not have anyone to help me get out of being fooled, right?
I remember Tom Green. He had this character. You know about him, yeah? He had this character who I think he was called Bubble Boy or something like that. And he's inside one of these entire body bubble, right? And a circle around his body. And he's going to the park and asking if he wants to play baseball with the people, but of course he can't because he's inside the bubble. And he's like this extreme example of what you're saying. Like, okay, so nothing should touch you, and then you want to be able to interact with the world. It's not going to be possible because the world has its ups and downs. You need to learn discernment, and just by being overly protective of people, what you're doing is you're robbing them of the possibility of learning. And this has been coming up in a few of the recent talks I've been recording. The idea on the one hand of learning or of having the possibility of making certain mistakes if you need them to learn, and somebody not stealing that opportunity or that chance from you, or you not stealing it from others by overprotecting them. But also, on the other hand, being able to develop enough to learn from other people's mistakes and not need to make those mistakes yourself. That would be a great balance. But I don't think the path to get there is by eliminating your chance to make mistakes, because then what it means is the mistakes made by others would need to be forced on you. The lessons would need to be forced on you because you are not given the chance to experience them firsthand. You are only told by this authority, okay, this is how things need to be done, and that's not necessarily a good path. You need to make a few mistakes until you eventually realize, okay, I should start listening to my elders or listening to the people that I respect and know that they have something for me, listening to them, and okay, what mistakes did they make and how can that information apply to my life? And okay, so I can grow myself, because growth happens from inside. It doesn't happen, it's like, okay, grow, you tell a plant, grow. No, it's going to grow at its own rhythm. You can help it by watering it, etc. But forcing it, or like picking the small tree like from the top and pulling it up to make it grow is not going to make it grow.
Yeah. So I think, two things. I don't know are you doing 2 segments of the show? Do you want to wrap it here and I'll tell the next story in the next segment?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. That'll be kind of a long story. So,
awesome.
Okay.
Perfect. So thank you, Emily. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. This is a great new way that I'm trying out the show. I've done a few already in 2 hours. So you can reach and find the second hour on my Patreon, which I'll be linking below. And also, please go ahead and check out Emily's channel. She's on YouTube, and she has her own Patreon as well, where you can find lots of interesting stuff. She's very, very funny and very interesting. But if you want to share your stuff, your links, etc., and we'll just wrap it up here and continue on the second hour.
Sure. You can find me on YouTube at Emily Moyer. Sometimes I have to post the videos elsewhere because of said censorship. You can find all my material at patreon.com/offplanetmedia or emilymoyer.locals.com. And let's see. I do nutrition consultations and life coaching, and I also do what I call storytelling sessions, which is basically where like we play the glass bead game together. And you can find out about all of that stuff on my website, which is emilycmoyer.com.
Yeah, that's amazing. And you know what? I want to also say I'm doing some Akashic Records readings. I recently started doing this, sharing this with people. So I also want to promote that, because I sometimes find it hard to promote my own stuff, and I'm learning to do that. So, and that maybe is something that calls your attention. We can talk a little bit about it on the second hour as well.
It gets easier to talk about yourself over time. Don't worry.
Yeah. Well, thank you, everybody. We'll be seeing you on the second half. Bye. Bye-bye.